available. The three most common patterns or styles that are available to most people are OmniGrid. So OmniGrid has this pretty unique yellow with black lines in them. Then we have Creative Grids, which is pretty much clear with black lines. And then we have the Quilters Select style rulers. They all have their own unique purposes, really. OmniGrid probably has been out the longest. Then we have Creative Grids, and then we have the Quilter Select. So they have different things on the back to prevent sort of slipping and sliding. If you struggle with the ability to get your ruler to stay on your fabric, I would highly recommend investing in the Quilters Select brand rulers. Whatever film they have on the back of these rulers makes it darn near impossible for them to move around on your fabric. So they will stay in place once you apply a little bit of pressure to them. There are also several different styles of cutting mats on the market. I recommend getting something that is considered to be self-healing. The reason you want to do a self-healing style mat is that over the course of the life of your mat, the fibers from your rotary cutters, they will sort of stick inside these areas here. And if you can get the fibers out, then the mats themselves will basically close up. So it is important to not continuously cut on the same spot on your mat over and over and over again without giving the mat the opportunity to sort of heal itself. That's how you wear out your mat. My best recommendation for getting consistent and accurate cutting is to continuously cut with the same brand of rulers. I highly encourage you to learn to use the rulers for your cutting and only use your mat for perhaps a straight line. That will make you much more consistent over the course of cutting. So I'm going to place some fabric on the mat here, and I'm going to show you how the fabric and rulers react to each other. Okay, so I just have a piece of fabric down here, and we have the OmniGrid ruler, and you can see that it is pretty slick. It moves all around. Then we have the Creative Grids ruler, and again, it is also pretty slick, but it doesn't move quite as much. You can see as I'm pushing down, the fabric is moving a little bit with it. And then we have the Quilters Select. So as soon as I stick this down, the only way to move this, I will literally be moving the entire fabric. The ruler has zero give on this fabric. So this ruler style will definitely help you make straighter, more accurate cuts because the ruler itself will not shift if you are applying pressure towards the edges of that. So these are the different styles of rulers. I have several Creative Grid rulers at home. I have been slowly replacing them with the Quilters Select version. And again, I'm very happy with the style of ruler this is. It is really nice to not have to apply so much downward pressure to hold your ruler in place so that it doesn't skip. So great option. These are definitely costly, so it might be something that you slowly invest in, but definitely worth it in the long run. So the next thing that I want to talk about is different styles of rotary cutters. So I have quite a selection of rotary cutters over here. I have two sizes. They come in three sizes. So you have a 28 millimeter, which is significantly smaller. Then you have 45, and you have 60 millimeter. So traditionally, if it is a 45 millimeter rotary cutter, These blades are essentially interchangeable, so it doesn't really matter what brand of blade I'm actually using. Oftentimes they will work with each other. The style that I prefer is this style. I like the way that this feels in my hand, and I like the easeability or the usability of how easy it is to change my blade. So these are called quick change blades, and literally there is a little section at the back of this blade, and I just pull down and my blade comes out. Then I can clean out the little bits that happen inside your we've been cutting with this a lot, so you can see I've got some extra fuzz. You do want to make sure that you're keeping this part clean. That will definitely get in your way as you're opening and closing your rotary cutter. So we definitely want to get rid of that. So there we go. But that is how easy it is to actually remove the blade so that I can change it. So I literally could just pick up the blade and change it. And then when I'm done changing my blade, just push that back up. Same with this style. I just pull this down and here is my blade. So these are considered to be quick change style blades. These you have to take the screw off. Don't lose your washer. Get the washer off and then don't lose it. Then you have your blade. You put your blade back on, you put this back on, you make sure your washer goes back on, and then you screw this back on. This is going to be the same way. These two are going to be a little bit more like the quick change, so I'm going to pull this down, and the top and the bottom come off, and then I will be able to change my blade. Same with this style. So the newer ones, a lot of the new versions that are coming out on the market are going to be this quick change style. The other things that change with these is how the blades close, how you hold them in your hand, and the weight. This style here, this Creative Grids one and this Quilters Select one, these are super heavy. They're very, very heavy, and that is the main reason that I personally do not like them. I have some damage in my wrist, and holding these actually causes more pain over the course of using them than the lighter weight one. But some people like these because the weight helps so that they feel like they don't need to apply as much pressure down on the rotary cutter when they're doing that. Again, a lot of what you will find with a rotary cutter has to do with personal preference, what feels comfortable in your hand. So these, the blades open with the little guys here. So you've got a left and a right. So you just open that, and then you would be able to cut in this direction. Now you couldn't flip this around and cut. You would need to close that or slide it over to the other side. So you just push this button in, and then you slide your little lever over to the side from side to side. This one doesn't have something on the back, it has it at the top, and you just push down and you slide to the side that you want open or closed. This one, you're going to push down on it and the blade is going to be basically locked down, and then to release it, you push the button. This style, you squeeze the handle and it will stay open while you're squeezing it, but you can also push the button in on the other side and then it will remain open. The advantage of not pushing the button in is as soon as you release it, it is covered, so you don't have to recover the blade. This style, you just pull down on the bottom and the blade is open. This style has a left and a right part. I typically just pull both pieces down, and then push both up. So this one and this one are designed basically, if you are a left or a right-handed person, you are basically doing the same thing. So you just pull down your buttons, and then you can cut either left-handed or you can cut right-handed. These are going to be much more, this is a right-handed version of this. This isn't designed for cutting with your left hand because of the area that you will be away from the blade. Again, this one is designed as a right-handed cutter, so it will not work well with a lefty. But these are designed to be left-handed or right-handed. You just push the blade open on the select side, and then you can just hold your rotary cutter with either hand. Again, the same thing with this one, either hand, and the blade will open on the opposite ends. So these are all designed for basically lefties or righties, so it doesn't matter. And these two are definitely more right-handed blades. So with the exception of these two, let's talk about how we hold our rotary cutters in our hand. It's important to find a way that makes it comfortable for you, because if you are cutting out something and you have a lot of cutting to do, you will be holding onto your rotary cutter for possibly hours at a time. So a lot of people, they hold their rotary cutter like this and they apply pressure downward and they're cutting. This applies a very strange angle to your arm and to your wrist, and it doesn't give you as much control as you possibly can have. So you don't want to grip these like this. All right, you definitely don't want to grip like this. What you want to do is you want to use this little indent into the top of the rotary cutters here as a place to rest your index finger. So you're going to grip your rotary cutter in your hand, and you're going to place your index finger up at the top. And by doing so, you will have a lot more control over how you're cutting. And as I flip my arm over, you will see this is a much more ergonomic way to hold your arm. It isn't at that weird direct angle. So this is going to give you a lot more control. It's going to give you a lot more steady cuts, and you will be less likely to run into the edge of your ruler, and that applies for both left-handed or right-handed. Again, you just place your finger at the top and then grip onto the bottom piece here, and then you'll be applying pressure downwards. So that is the proper way to hold these styles, and they're all going to be the same. They're going to give you the ability to put your index finger someplace at the top, and you will be away from the blade, so you don't have to worry about cutting yourself. But that is how you would do that on these style handles, all right? So holding your rotary cutter in the correct manner, again, will make it a lot easier for you to do a lot of cuts over the length of several hours without getting a lot of stress in your joints, which is super important, the older efficiently. So I am going to talk about the basics of cutting for a left-handed person or a right-handed person. So I'm just cutting this little piece of fabric in half, so I have two pieces. So if you are a left-handed cutter, when you are cutting, the majority of your fabric is going to be towards the left side, all right? Because when we're cutting with our fabrics, we're going to be placing our ruler over to the edge of the fabric, and we'll be continuously cutting on the left-hand side. So we'll be moving and trimming and moving and trimming. And that is how we will do the basics of our cutting. And when you are a right-handed person, you will start with the majority of your fabric towards the right, and you will then place your ruler on the left-hand side, cut with your right, left, right, left, right. If you have ever seen me cut anything, you will know that I basically cut with both hands. That is very scary for some people to do at the beginning. I do encourage you to use your non-dominant hand for cutting smaller pieces. You won't feel like you're trying to really stretch with that arm, and that should help you speed up the process a little bit. So A couple of things to note: that if we have to fold our fabrics because the fabric is either larger than our cutting surface or it is substantially larger than the ruler that we have to cut, we want to make sure that when we are folding this, that we have a straight line at the bottom. So we're going to ignore the side pieces right now. It doesn't matter. What we really want to do is we want to make sure that when we take our slices from the fabric pieces, that the ruler is straight on the line. If it isn't straight on the line, when you open up your fabric piece, if this has ever happened to you, when you go to open up your piece that you just cut open, sometimes you'll find that the fabric sort of has a little bit of a V shaped in the corner, or it might be sort of like a W in the middle, and that is because when you went to cut, when you cut on the folded edge here, you were paying attention to how straight it was here, but you were not paying attention to how straight it was here, and that's what creates those little V's and sort of W pieces that happen when you open up a fold. So that is super important to pay attention to. So I'm actually going to fold this 2 times, because I have a really small ruler here just for this purpose. And I am going to cut. So I'm going to start by cutting with my left hand here so that you can see how that's going to work. So when I'm paying attention, I'm going to be looking towards the bottom of this. I want to make sure that I have a straight line. So the only thing that I actually use my mat for is the straight line. So I'm going to place this fabric on here, and I'm looking to make sure that I have something straight here, and I have a double fold, so I want to look to make sure that I have a straight line in both places. So I'm looking down here, and I am definitely straight, and I am straight up at the top too. So this is actually pretty straight, but if this was really wonky, what I would do so that I don't have to flip my fabric around from side to side, if you are not comfortable cutting with your non-dominant hand, if you really needed to cut a 3-inch piece out of this first section here, what I would do is I would cut that a little bit oversized. So I might cut that first piece 3.5 inches, and then I could trim that little one up as we go. The other thing that you can sometimes do is you can trim off just the small corner. The reason that I would prefer to do it this way is because I have more of my fabric at the bottom here, so I'm much more likely to get a straight edge here than I would be if I just clipped a little corner of this off. So the alternate way of doing this would be to go down to this side of the fabric, place my ruler where I need it to be, grab my rotary cutter, and then when I'm holding on my ruler, even though I know this ruler doesn't have a lot of give or stretch or move or whatever, I prefer and recommend that when you place your hand on your ruler, you are placing your hand on the edge of the ruler and at least putting a or 2 fingers. I put my ring finger and my pinky finger at the edge of my ruler onto my fabric. This does 2 things. It ensures that my hand is completely away from the place that I'm actually cutting, but it also helps to stabilize. So if I'm using a ruler that doesn't hold onto my fabric a lot, by putting my finger on the outside edge over there, it helps if I'm pushing in on this. Without that, I have more ability to push in. So using your ring finger and your pinky finger as kind of just stability over to the edge. So if I didn't want to cut oversized on my first piece, I would flip the fabric over and I would trim this edge. Then I would take this piece of fabric and I would need to flip it over on this direction, and then start making the cuts that I need. So I've got my, let's try to move this over a little bit. There we go. I've got my hand on the corner and my edges are being held over here, and I'm going to trim. Okay, and so my finger is at the top. I'm holding this straight up and down, and I am cutting away from me. Always cutting away from you. Do not cut towards you. Don't cut to the side. Don't cut backwards. Always cut towards you. When you're finished cutting, if the thing that you're going to do next is not an immediate another cut, get into the habit of closing that blade. That way you will not accidentally get yourself cut with that. But so I have cut this piece here, and we're looking at our edges here, and we're nice and straight. And then we are, again, nice and straight. So we don't have those little V's or W areas. It's not shifting the fabrics at my fold. And that is, again, because I'm making sure that I'm being super straight on the two areas that are folded. And I am using the bottom of my ruler to ensure that I am staying nice and straight. Okay, so then I am going to cut. Okay, so I'm just going to keep doing that over and over and over again. Now, if I were a right-handed person, I would want the majority of my fabric to be on the right-hand side of me, and I would be placing my ruler on to the left edge, finding the bottom edge, and then again placing my hand over to the side and making nice, straight, even cuts. You can see that I'm always using my index finger up at the top. The other thing that I'm doing when I'm cutting is I'm making sure that I'm staying straight up. You don't want to turn into your ruler. What that does is it will start shaving the edges of your ruler apart, and it will also nick your blade. So change your blade often, and if you have a little space where it's not cutting, you have a nick in your blade. So that means you probably ran into the edge of your ruler at some point, or attempted to start on the corner of your ruler, and now that edge is nicked. That will never go away. You might as well just change your blade. So the reason that I like to use the rulers for doing all of my measurements is because they are very consistent. The mats, and depending on the brand of the mat that you're using, depends upon like how big the lines are. Sometimes they're larger when you get to like the 9-inch, the 12-inch pieces, and sometimes they're smaller in different areas. So the lines that you're using are not always consistent, and that can make a big difference over the course of an entire project. So if your mat is not as consistent, or your ruler is not as consistent, it doesn't matter how well you sew. If the pieces are getting cut in slightly different sizes, that will definitely play a part in that. So this ruler, all of the lines here are very, very narrow, but the lines in the center are even a little bit more narrow than the lines on the outside. So if we were comparing the lines from this ruler to this one, you can see that the OmniGrid one, the one at the bottom, those lines are substantially larger. So when you're placing your fabric underneath to cut, where do you place it? So are you consistently placing it on the inside edge? Are you on the outside edge? Are you trying to gauge that and be somewhere in the middle? While it doesn't seem like that would make a big enough difference, let's say you have a block that has 15 small pieces all the way around, and you've got basically a thread or two difference on each of your pieces. By the time you get through those 15 pieces, you suddenly have a block that is now 1/4 of an inch or maybe even 1/2 an inch larger than it was actually intended to be. So it is important to be consistent about the placement of the fabrics and where you are placing them on your particular ruler. So that's why I like to use a single brand of ruler when I'm cutting out a project, and I'm paying very close attention to the placement of my fabric pieces and trying to be very, very, very consistent with that. So what happens if the size of the piece is larger than the size of my ruler? I use a 2-ruler method. So I didn't bring a second version of this over with me, but when I am cutting, I will use 2 versions, and oftentimes that is why I use a 6.5 by 24-inch ruler when I'm typically cutting, but I'm also typically cutting on a slightly bigger cutting mat than this. So it's nice to have something that is long, and then it's nice to have something that is a little bit smaller. So if I wanted to cut something that was, so this particular ruler happens to be 8 inches. If I wanted to cut something that was 10 inches, so in order to prevent me from using the mat, what I would do is I would use a second version of this, and I would put that at the 2-inch mark. So I would start, we're pretending that this is the same brand as this. So I would take this ruler, this is 8, and I would place this ruler here on the 2-inch mark. Okay, I'm being very cautious about where everything is lined up. And then while holding my hand on this, I would take my second ruler and I would place it on top of my fabric, and I would butt it right up to the previous ruler, okay? So now this is 8 inches and this is 2 inches. So I have my 10 inches. I don't need to keep this ruler here because I'm gonna cut on this side. But again, I'm gonna place my hand over the outside edge of that, and I'm gonna come over here to my rotary cutter, and I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna cut that. So I used the second ruler to make up the distance for a longer span of things. So the other thing that will make your cutting appear to be more accurate in the long run is how you pre-treat your fabrics. When we first started sewing, when I first started sewing, pre-washing fabrics was a very common thing. People would often ask you or refer you to pre-wash your fabrics. We pre-wash fabrics because that pre-shrinks them. And if anybody tells you that the fabrics that you are using these days do not have shrinkage, they are not being honest with you. These fabrics most definitely will shrink. Since I oftentimes don't have an opportunity to pre-shrink my fabrics, I do pre-treat my fabrics, and I usually pre-treat my fabrics using a little bit of starch or a lot of starch, depending on how much I want my fabrics to be a little bit stiffer. But you can also use plain water. So you can spritz it with water. Introducing water to the fabric before you cut it and before you sew it will allow all of the shrinkage to happen, so that when you are piecing your blocks later, and if you hit it with a steam iron or you hit it with a little bit of water, if it hasn't been pre-shrunk, it is going to shrink up on you. And now, even though you cut it accurately and you sewed it accurately, it is now no longer the correct size. So pay attention to how your fabrics are being treated, how you intend to iron them, and what the final result of the process is. I highly recommend using Bass Press or starch or some sort of pre-wash or pre-wet your fabric pieces before you attempt to cut them. It will give you the very best results. And the stiffer the fabric, the easier it is to cut. It will stay in place and it won't shift around on you as much. So I hope this is helpful in learning to use your rotary cutter and selecting the style that you would like and the ruler that you would like. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.